Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we have the case of Tia Sharp, a case that actually comes from the United Kingdom. And why? Because we're about to start Latin American Cases Week, so I wanted to step away from Latin America for a bit. Before starting with the 7 days of different cases, well, 7 days in general, there will be 7 Latin American cases that you all have been recommending to me. But they might not be one after the other because they require a lot of editing and preparation, so they might not be consecutive, but I'll try to do them as close together as possible. I don't have much more to explain, so up here in the eye that's on the screen, you can see the rest of my cases. Below, you'll find my social media links if you'd like to follow me. Let's dive right in. She was Aunt Christine Sharp, born on June 30th, 2000 in Cretan, London. There isn't much to say about her actions or true nature, as she was only 12 years old when the events occurred. She lived with her mother and 2 younger brothers. She was a cheerful person who trusted her grandmother and mother deeply. They had a close relationship, almost like best friends. According to them, Tia was the kind of person who cheered everyone up, who was always laughing. And since she had so much trust in the people around her, she could express herself without any problem, and she really seemed happy. Her parents were Natalie Sharp and Stephen Carter. As you can see, Tia had her mother's last name since she was the one who raised her. Also, Natalie had a partner with whom they lived for a while. This leads me to tell you that when Tia was only 8 years old, social services was called to the house because there were supposedly problems. It had to do with an alleged problem of marijuana use. But it was also important to go check the situation since Natalie's boyfriend at the time had some substance abuse problems. Social services called this dysfunctional family, however. At no point did Tia show signs of abuse or anything like that, so the situation was set aside a bit because there really wasn't any problem. She didn't have any marks on her body, nor any problem that could be seen in her behavior or attitude. She didn't show any signs that anyone had abused her in any way. The other problem the family could have came from the boyfriend of Auntie's grandmother. She is Auntie's grandmother, Christine Sharp, who was dating this man you see here named Stuart Hazel. Stuart, on his side, had a somewhat troubled past. He had been in jail a few times for several crimes and had been convicted of different things for minor offenses. Stuart told Christine about how much he had been mistreated during his childhood, and all of that, according to him, had led to him having a rather difficult life. But according to Christine, he never brought problems to the family, he was not abusive, nor was he violent towards them. Also, they had met in 2002 when Aunt was only 2 years old, and until the day of the events, they had been together for 10 years. Therefore, he grew up with the family. He saw Aunt grow up, he was close to her, and over time he became part of the family, so he didn't seem like a bad person. Anyway, there's also something very curious in this story, and that is actually Stuart met Christine through his daughter. That is, he was with Natalie first, and then afterwards. Once he broke up with her a few weeks later, he started seeing Christine, and from that moment on, they were inseparable. Because of all these things, the fact that the family actually got along very well, they all knew each other and trusted one another. Aunt used to sleep at her grandparents' house. She called them grandparents, even though Stuart wasn't really her biological grandfather. She had a great time at her grandparents' house, since there were a few problems at her own home. As I said at the beginning, she had 2 younger siblings, and therefore there was a lot of noise, a lot of things going on throughout the whole house. It was messy and she didn't have any privacy, which is why she preferred being at her grandmother's house, where she had her own room, where she could play PlayStation with Stuart, where they cooked for her, where they treated her very well. There were no fights with her mother or anything like that, so she would spend several weekends at their house. Her grandmother had no issue with this, and Stuart was thrilled as he loved spending time with her. Given all that context, we can then see how the events unfold. All of this begins on August 1st, 2012. As the weekend approaches, Tia decides to ask her grandmother if she can stay at her house, sending her a text message on her cell phone. This phone was shared between both grandparents, so the one who answers is Stuart, calling directly to the mother's phone, replying that Tia could stay at the house that weekend. But something was very important. And it was that Christine had night shifts, so there was a part of the day when she wouldn't be there for many hours. It occurred at night, which was insignificant. This used to happen. She often had night shifts, so it's not something unusual for the family. Tia had stayed with her grandparents many times before, so her mother agreed without issue. On August 2nd, Natalie took her daughter to the transportation, leaving her there for her grandparents to collect later. Once she arrived in Addington, where the house was, Stuart decided to take her to do some shopping for the weekend. And then they go have lunch together. Everything seemed to be going more than well, and in the afternoon, Natalie called her grandparents' house to ask how everything was going. Stuart tells her what I just told you, that they had a good time, that they went out to eat, and also, she could hear Auntie's laughter in the background playing with the PlayStation behind them. So the mother was completely reassured that she had arrived home safely and that everything was going according to plan. The bad part comes on August 3rd, the next day when Christine comes back from work. She arrives home a little after noon and notices that Tia isn't there, so she asks Stuart what was going on. He answers her that Tia had gone with a friend to a shopping mall to buy some things and that she would be back, that she had left. At noon, they waited for her a while, but she never returned. As night fell, she became unresponsive, not answering her phone or replying to messages. So Christine called Natalie to ask if she had seen her, knew anything, or was with her. Actually, she didn't know anything. She didn't even know that she was going out with a friend to buy something. She was completely unaware of the situation. So they realized that no one knew where she was, and therefore the three of them start looking for her. Both of them get together and go by car to look for her around the neighborhood to see if maybe she was there without a phone battery. Maybe there had been an accident, but they didn't find her. And that's when they decide to go to the police to file a report. The thing is, once they get to the police, they notice that the last person to see her was Stuart. And he didn't have the best record, so he was one of the first persons of interest in this case. However, there's something else that happened during this time. And the neighbors were asked if they had seen her, and one of them answered yes, that at noon he had seen her leave, and he was sure it was Aunt. So they didn't doubt Stuart too much at that moment and decided to search the house. Without looking for anything extremely suspicious, just looking for some clue about where she could be. Inside the house, it was discovered that Auntie's phone was still there, which is quite strange, considering she was supposed to meet a friend. Additionally, given her young age, she likely carried the phone for emergencies and communication. It would be odd for her to leave it behind without cause. The cell phone had no extra clues about what could have happened and no messages indicating which friend she was with. They really didn't have anything to start the investigation with. So the family spent the next few days looking for her, wearing shirts with her face on them, making banners and posters. Anything that could bring attention to her face so that anyone who had seen her could tell them where she was. That's when many people began publicizing the case. The media began to publicize the case of Aunt Sharp, and they started looking for her everywhere. And several people contacted the family and the police to say that they had seen her. However, none of the reported sightings were actually Aunt Garantia, leading to several outcomes. The family goes on television to talk, and the uncle also desperately tries to get someone to share information, but none of this really works. However, there was something very strange, and it's the fact that Aunt didn't appear on any security camera. Stuart said she went to a mall, which would have many store cameras. However, she didn't appear on any of them. She wasn't on public transit cameras or anywhere else, as if she had never left at all. And that's when the police start to focus a bit more on Stuart, trying to find out if he had anything to do with this whole case. For his part, Stuart felt very attacked, so what he decided to do was go to the media to give an interview. To talk about Tia, about her behavior, about the moment when she disappeared, and to talk a little about his perspective on the situation. This occurred on August 9th, 6 days after Tia vanished. He finishes the interview and leaves completely normal, as if nothing had happened, believing that he had cleared up the whole situation. However, the police, the investigators who were watching this, decided to bring in certain people to analyze Stuart's gestures. During that interview, that's when a few details about his behavior come to light, which are a bit strange. First of all, he didn't seem to be telling the story of something sad or something that confused him, but rather he seemed upbeat, telling a rehearsed story as if it were a tale. He didn't seem sad, let's say, but he also included details that had nothing to do with the story, details that no one could care about, that were minimal. The thing is, they were details that seemed real, and I'm going to explain this in a pretty simple way. If you're lying and in the middle you add certain parts of the story that are real that actually happened to you, it makes you believe the story yourself more easily, which makes it harder for someone to realize that it's actually a made-up story. For example, if he starts telling a big lie and in the middle says he ate a cheese sandwich, that part is likely real, but the rest isn't. However, he adds a detail that's believable and absolutely real. So he puts things they did the day before into the middle of the story to make what happened on the day of the event seem a bit more believable. But it was pretty obvious that he was making up a lot of things. There were many signs, many gestures that showed he wasn't remembering things, but rather making them up. He would shrug his shoulders in that "I don't know" gesture when he was telling things that, according to him, were real. Also, something I found quite curious is that he blinked in that interview more than 40 times per minute, which for those who don't know is a lot. That's why the police finally decide to search the house again for a fourth time, thinking that probably Stuart was hiding something. So they arrange things so they can go the next day. They wanted to go with a forensic team to examine fluids, to see if there had been a fight or if there was something hidden somewhere in the house. And Stuart, up to that point, seemed to be taking things normally. It was then, on August 10th, that he woke up and told Christine he was going outside to get something and that he would be back, but he never came back, Christine. So that morning, before the police arrived, she woke up and started to notice a very strange smell. A bad smell. She searched the entire house, trying to locate the source of the mysterious smell. For a moment, she thought the sound might be coming from the bathroom drain or a pipe. She thought something was rotting, but she couldn't find where this smell was coming from. So when the forensic team arrives, she tells them about the smell and they start to suspect that there was definitely something inside the house. It turns out that thanks to the team of experts who arrived, they were able to notice that the smell was coming from the very top and they managed to access this place, which was the attic. It turns out that next to the roof, inside the attic full of construction materials, full of dirt, and next to the water tank, there was a bag. Inside the bag, there was a blanket, and inside the blanket was Anne Sharp's body. Bags containing identifying objects were found near the body, which was in poor condition. Let's remember, next to the water tank in an attic that is never visited, there is a lot of humidity. So, definitely, it's not a good place to hide something that is decomposing. Also, the body was without clothes, and the clothes were in another bag. The first people of interest, of course, were Tia's grandparents, because they were the owners of the house. They were the ones who were with her, and the ones responsible for taking care of her. However, Christine didn't know anything at all about what was happening. And I mean it completely seriously. It's not just that she didn't know her granddaughter's body was in the house, but she also didn't know about Stuart's behavior. She wasn't aware. Remember, she was with this person for 10 years. And according to her, although she knew he had a strange past and that he was a bit of an alcoholic, she had no idea what he was capable of. So of course, for a few days, they also kept her under surveillance. For a while, she couldn't visit the younger members of the family, she couldn't see most of her family. She had to stay close to the police as they investigated her potential involvement in the case. And she was also questioned to find out if she had any idea how things had happened. After a few days of investigating, they realized she was not involved and had no knowledge of the situation. But on his side, Stuart was missing and on the run from the law. The last time he had been seen at that moment was on a train heading to London. Fortunately, thanks to the number of security cameras there were, he could be easily tracked. Until the owner of a store called the police to say that Stuart had been with him, asking for vodka and asking him to help find his granddaughter. However, he couldn't keep him there, so when the police arrived, he was already gone. They used dogs to try to track him, to try to get to where he was, and they succeeded. They found him in a park, completely drunk and not even recognizing where he was, so they took him in for questioning. During the course of this pursuit, the forensic experts were still examining the house. And that's when they find something of vital importance to the case. It turned out to be a secure digital card very well hidden above a door. Before checking the card's contents, Stuart was at the police station recounting what happened. At that moment, he admitted that he had some guilt in the murder of Aunt, or rather in Aunt's death at that time. According to him, this wasn't a murder, but rather Aunt had fallen down the stairs by accident. And at that moment, he was completely intoxicated, so he couldn't help her. According to Stuart, he felt very guilty, and at that moment he fainted. He was completely unconscious. He woke up the next day and saw that she was dead. So instead of facing the guilt, instead of telling the mother, the aunt, and the grandmother what had happened, he decides instead to undress her, hide her body in a bag, and leave her in the attic, which makes absolutely a lot of sense. Besides, he also expressed several times that he loved his granddaughter, that he really enjoyed being with her. You shouldn't treat someone you love that way, right? That was more than clear, a lie, and everything was revealed once they managed to recover what was in the memory inside. Inside it, there were photos and videos of Aunt, and there were also photos of other underage girls who looked a lot like her, with the same hair, with the same glasses, and even the same face. It was like he had a fetish or an obsession with that kind of person, or rather, that he was way too fixated specifically on Aunt and had fantasies about her. But in order to understand this a little more, we need to see where it starts. In Stuart's past, like I said at the beginning, Stuart didn't have an easy life, so to speak. His parents had a lot of problems, so they put him up for adoption at a very young age. Furthermore, at age 16, he was a victim of sexual abuse, similar to the recent case of David Barnett that I covered. If you want to know what I'm talking about, go to the one that's on the screen, but it's more or less the same. It's a very similar situation. But there's a point where these two situations diverge. Stuart, in 2007, officially became Christine's partner after being together for a few years, and he moved in with her in Addington. He really didn't say anything about his past, except that it had been bad, and Christine, who didn't know the whole story, simply decided to trust him. After spending many years together, it felt like she already knew him. I mean, she knew how he behaved at home. She knew he wasn't bad. She knew he didn't act dangerously around her, but that didn't change the fact that he was dangerous. He had addiction problems that he partly hid. She knew he drank, but she didn't know he abused substances. And she also didn't know how many times he went to prison and how many times he was convicted for other things. However, in 2010, he was sentenced to 12 months in prison for walking down the street with a machete. However, Christine was apparently unaware of this violent act and defended him. Back at home, he didn't do these kinds of things, he wasn't violent, he didn't threaten anyone, Christine didn't know what he was like. The reality is that he had been in prison 3 times and had been sentenced 30 times. That is, during his life, he committed several crimes that she had no idea about. Also, throughout his life, the relationship he had with Aunt was very normal. There was a lot of trust, he had seen her grow up, and no one had noticed any strange behavior. It didn't seem like he was grooming her for anything, nor was he touching her inappropriately. But as she got closer and closer to 12 years old, he started to see her differently. At one point, he started secretly recording her, taking pictures of her, and every day he fed more and more into this fantasy he had about her. For my aunt, he was her grandfather. She had no idea, not even the possibility of understanding what was happening. The memory discovered in the house contains many disturbing things, like a video of her applying lotion to her legs that later. Then he went on to make a video of her sleeping, in which you can see him in the background. You can see his shadow watching her. You could notice how each day he got a little closer. All of this proved that he had an intention with Tia that could harm her, and obviously it could also prove that he was the one who had killed her. But one of the strongest pieces of evidence in police cases is what the body says. Unfortunately, it was very decomposed, to the point where the mother wasn't allowed to see it because of how awful it could have been for her. It was unrecognizable, and therefore the forensic tests didn't yield good results. It was impossible to determine how he had died. Almost nothing about what had happened could be determined. But it was thanks to the videos and the objects inside the house that a story could be constructed. Inside the memory, there were also photos and videos of him pleasuring himself with certain objects that were in the house. The objects were collected, and DNA tests were done on them, and some of them had Aunt's DNA. So there was the reason behind all of this. There was a sexual motive, and there was a photo that matched what I'm telling you, which was post-mortem, meaning after the girl's death. I'm not going to describe the pose she was in. I'm not going to describe most of the things because honestly, it's very disturbing. But according to the psychologists who analyzed this case, that photo showed that he had taken it with the intention of preserving the moment. To preserve that moment in which he abused her, in which she was already dead, and to be able to relive it over and over again. It was deduced that he had returned to that photo several times, and that he used this memory to review it over and over again. What confuses me the most about all of this is that even though they had all this evidence, he declared himself innocent above all else. He kept sticking to his story about the stairs, that he was drunk and felt very ashamed, but he couldn't look the family in the eye. He couldn't face them or explain what had happened. Clearly, he was lying. And it didn't last long. Since the whole trial process is quite long, trials usually take a lot of time to present evidence and give testimonies. He could no longer maintain the deception. He didn't want to have to go through all that, nor did he want to have to explain this story he had made up over and over again, or answer questions about all of it. So after a while, he just pleaded guilty. The problem with this is that he didn't say exactly what had happened, he just said that he had done it. Therefore, we can only speculate about what led him to do all that. We don't know if it was even planned or if it was something he fantasized about and suddenly exploded. But what is speculated is that she probably rejected him that day, that he wanted to fulfill his fantasy and she refused. After confessing his guilt, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 38 years. Which means that maybe at 70 years old he could be released. However, it's possible that he may never be released, since someone would have to review the case and decide that he can be set free. Honestly, I don't think he can, simply because he had a very long prior record and suddenly exploded into this. He's not fit for society, not now or any time in the next 38 years. During the trial, Tia's entire family gathered to witness the moment he would be sentenced. Tia's father. He specifically asked the press he absolutely wanted this man to be sentenced to death. The day of the sentencing, that is the following day, he requested this upon receiving a life sentence. You can see this image here, which is somewhere between a celebration and a complaint that it wasn't the death penalty. Also, the neighbor who said he had seen her was also sentenced to 5 years in prison because he gave false information to the police. And could they have discovered all of this much earlier? That same day when they went to ask the neighbors, he could have said that he hadn't seen her. We honestly don't know why he did that. And the case could have ended there, determining what had happened to the body much earlier and being able to give the family the body before it decomposed. It caused a whole problem. So, 5 years in prison for the neighbor who gave false information and we don't know why. On the other hand, I also want to talk about this person's past. There's something very similar to the case of David Barnett, which was exactly how it happened. And the truth about all of this is that I could sit here and try to defend this person based on their past, on how they grew up. And this is where we can really see the differences in how each person deals with it, how each person lives with what happened to them. In the case of David Barnett, the one I mentioned before, he also grew up with a lot of abuse. He grew up looking for families that would accept him. And he ended up killing his 2 adoptive grandparents precisely because his adoptive father had sexually abused him, and he snapped. However, he never showed any predatory sexual behavior. He never did anything to any other child. He didn't mistreat his partner with whom he had a child. He simply lacked proper etiquette in his city. He had some problems with alcohol, but he didn't mistreat anyone until this happened, when he killed his grandparents in a fit of rage. In Stuart Hazel's case, I believe he couldn't be in his city due to a significant difference. Because of what happened to him in life, he decided instead to turn to crime, to steal, to be violent in public. And he even abused a child. Was she a preteen at the time when he attacked her? And honestly, I don't have an ounce of empathy for those who do anything to a child, to a minor. I have no empathy for his former circumstances. Even though the documentary tried to show that, this is what happened to him, that he hadn't had a good life. But as you can see, I have 2 completely different examples with the same past, and in one, he never chose to be a sexual predator and sought help his entire life. On the other hand, Stuart simply went on and ended up abusing a girl and killing her in return. I don't have the slightest bit of empathy for this person, and honestly, I truly hope with all my heart that he rots in prison for the rest of his life. Slowly, I wanted to add that final thought for anyone who shares my opinion, for anyone who can't say it in the comments. Also, go check out the Baby Barnett case if you want to better understand what I'm talking about and see exactly why. I have more empathy for the other one than for this one, but anyway, that's it. This is where the video ends. That was all. You already know that next week, or rather this week when you're watching this video, the Latin American cases are starting. So I hope you enjoy all the effort it's going to take me to make cases so frequently. If you want to recommend more cases to me, leave them down below in the comments. I'm reading them, and leave your opinions about what happened here. This is where we end this video. On the side are my Patreons. Thank you all for supporting me through that platform. If you want to know more about it, the link to Patreon is below. That's all for now. Check out the recommended video, subscribe by clicking on my face, and I'll see you next time. Bye.